What is going on, people? Hope you're having a great day, or whatever time it is. I hope it is great for you. So I've had the pleasure of owning and using this lens right here, the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter, since July of 2024. Now, I did a review on this lens a while back, probably about 7 months ago, as of making this video right here. What I wanted to do here is I wanted to do a follow-up on just some things that have pretty much stuck out to me about this lens, and overall if I would recommend it and things of that sort. Now, I don't remember if I said this in my review, but I do use this lens primarily handheld, and there are some challenges here and there with it, but it is completely doable. I just want to answer that question first and foremost, because I feel like there are a lot of people who are thinking about this. I guess the other thing before we actually go on to these points is that this video is probably going to appeal more to people who are in the amateur to intermediate photography space, just because of the fact that, you know, a pro photographer is probably going to have their own process that works for them. I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out since I've only been doing photography for like a year and some months now. But anyway, with all that being said, let's get ahead into all of the points that I want to talk about today. First point I want to talk about is managing the weight of this lens. And if you're using it handheld like me, that's going to be something that's pretty important. So the first thing I want to talk about is getting yourself two straps. Now you can see here that I have two Peak Design straps, one in sort of this gold brown color and then one in this green color. The way I have these set up is that I have one connected directly to the lens right here on the sort of strap hooks that are on the lens. Then I have the gold one hooked up to the camera. Now there's a couple of reasons I actually went ahead and did that. First reason is because I do a lot of hiking, a ton of hiking on uneven terrain, and having one strap, I found that this actually put way more stress on my right shoulder, which is where I primarily have my camera set up, just hanging all the time. What the second strap that's connected to the camera does help me with is balancing that weight on uneven terrain. So like if I'm moving up and down, moving really erratically, or things of that sort, I can just kind of bring it up, shorten it, and it will essentially take that weight off of my shoulders in some ways. It's not a perfect science or anything, but it does definitely help. I mean, the weight is still concentrated here, but like I said, it helps. It works for me. The second reason I would recommend two straps is because if you're like me, you're not only carrying one lens at a time. So what having these two straps also allows me to do is make that switch easy. A lot of times when I'm going into the woods hiking, I'm looking for birds and things of that sort, but there's going to be some times where I do see a scene that I want to take a picture of, a static scene. So all I can do here is just take the lens off, go into my bag, switch, you know, set everything up, and it's much easier to just go about switching these lenses as opposed to just having one holding the camera body and then basically, you know, just accidentally dropping it or something along those lines. So that is another reason, just being able to very easily switch between the lenses you have with you if you have more than one. The third reason I bought these two straps is for a little insurance. So Peak Design states that these anchors here, these little really well built anchors, but anchors that can still pretty much break because of what material they're made of, these can support about 200 pounds. Essentially, the weight of this lens is about, what, 4 or 5 pounds or something like that. You have to figure, though, when you are hiking, when you're moving, you're stressing out these anchors much more than you think. So if I go ahead and, let's say, for instance, have these anchors break, I do have the ones attached to my camera. I know that the ones connected to my camera don't get stressed out nearly as much as the ones connected to my lens. And of course, you can go ahead and change these anchors. I mean, they're pretty darn cheap. They're pretty reasonably priced. But if you have one break on you, you know, you're just not going to have your lens just flying around or rolling down a hill. Yeah, just insurance, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so yes, that was a lot of points talking about the weight. And I promise you, I'm sort of done with talking about the weight, but this one kind of goes into it too, I guess. The second thing I want to talk about is really just being aware of how much you're twisting your wrists when you are holding this lens. When I first got it, I really didn't take that into account. And a lot of times I would end up with my wrist hurting like a ton, like really badly, because I would be tracking a bird in the trees, like just kind of going upward, staying upward for like long periods of time. And then I had to end up just kind of putting everything down. One thing I have tried to do, and it's kind of worked out well for me in a sense, is you can see I have the tripod collar sort of upward here. And the reason I do that is because I've stuck to putting my hand right here, sort of just kind of like under it, and then using my thumb to get on the other side. And then that gives my wrist the break that it needs a lot of times. It is less stable, I feel like, because I'm not used to supporting the weight of the lens like this, but it does help, especially when you feel like you really need to get that shot. So just another tip here, you know, just be careful of wrist fatigue. So the next point I want to get at is zooming with this lens. Now, there is a zoom ring here, but I find that it takes way too much effort. Like, you have to really remember where to position your hand and everything to kind of get through the full length that this lens offers. So what I will say is it's much easier to just push and pull, and I think I might have said this in my review. A lot of times I even have the lens hood just kind of not in use, and I'm still able to do it very, very, very easily. I guess the downside to it though is it is a farther travel when you are zooming like this to get back to the switches here that are on the side. However, developing the muscle memory for that is really, really, really easy at that point. In my review of this lens, I talked about how good I found the stabilization to be. Yes, there are 2 stabilization modes, but I predominantly use mode 1, which is more than adequate for most of my use cases. It's pretty amazing to see just how much the frame firms up when you engage the AF button and take the shot, like in these examples of me trying to take some pictures of the moon. At 150 millimeters, you can see here that there is still some movement as I engage the AF button, but there are moments where the frame is almost completely still, allowing me to quickly press the shutter button and get the shot. When zooming into 600 millimeters, the shake from me holding this lens is much more visible, but again, there are moments where things just kind of firm up and allow me to get the shot that I'm trying to get, as seen here in these pictures I took. I feel like the screen recordings I just showed you all don't do the stabilization within this lens justice, but if other examples are anything to go off of, then I'd say that mode 1 is most likely going to be more than good enough for all your needs. I do want to say that I have shot with the second mode, of course, but I either tend to forget to enable it, or when I do remember that it's there, I never have enough time to enable it because I was taking a picture of something that was still and just happened to see something moving that I wanted to get a picture of. I find that even though the second mode is more meant for panning, the first mode works just as well if you're relatively stable yourself and if you use an adequate amount of shutter speed, like 1/640th of a second, which for me is the minimum I constantly use or leave manual mode in. I think it might also be helpful to say that it is possible to get under that minimum shutter speed and get something good. I tend to switch lenses while I'm out, and if I'm switching to something like my 24-105, then I most likely won't need something like a 1/640 shutter speed. Usually I'll lower it and forget to put it back, and once I start using the Sigma 150-600, despite using that lower shutter speed, I'm still able to capture what some, or even I guess in this case myself, would call decent photos, as you can see here again. I say this to say that the stabilization on this lens has been quite good, given that I primarily use it handheld. I think there's something really important to understand about this lens. More precisely, its max focal length and how that can potentially be a limiting issue. Now, first off, let me say that the 600 millimeters you get with this lens is definitely a lot of reach. There's no disputing that at all. But sometimes there are situations where it's not enough reach. This is the issue I've been running into lately, and something that a potential buyer may not think about right away. I've been trying to give you an idea of when 600 millimeters may not be enough by standing on this beach that I was just showing you and trying to zoom in on these mallards here. Right now I am at the max 600 millimeter length this lens allows, and this is as far as I can get to them, even though they're really not that far out on the water. Here's another example of me trying to fill the frame with this Canada Goose here, but as you can see, I'm at the max 600 millimeters, and this is just as far as I can get. Since I am using the A7 IV, there is an option to use the APS-C crop mode available on this camera, but at that point, even at 900 millimeters, sometimes I still don't have as much reach as I'd like. You can see this here in these pictures I took of this common goldeneye. These pictures are actually the first time I've actually seen one of these, but again, the issue here is that I still wasn't able to get close enough. The Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter is an amazing lens, and I still believe this, but if I had to tell the honest truth, it's an amazing lens that is limited by Sony on purpose for the purposes of making people purchase their similar variant Sony has, which is the 200 to 600 millimeter. In my situation, I feel like I would have still purchased this lens, but now because of Sony's restrictions, I'm kind of left with three choices, or at least three choices I can think of. Those choices are to purchase a Sony body with a higher megapixel count like the A7R4 or A7R5, sell or trade this lens and pay the difference to get the Sony equivalent and purchase either a 1.4 times teleconverter or the 2 times teleconverter. And the last option is the one that I've kind of been considering the most. And what I'm referring to is to purchase an APS-C body, something like the A6600 or the A6700, which more likely would be the A6700 for me. Of course, each of those options do have their own cons, but what I'm really getting at here is that you do have some choices. You'll just have to spend a little bit more money initially, or if you do purchase the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter, you'll just kind of have to figure out which one of these is going to be best for you after that. I will say that it is pretty ridiculous that Sony limits third-party manufacturers from making teleconverters, at least for their bodies, but I suppose I get it at that point because they could just kind of lose out on money with those third-party manufacturers making cheaper options. So I know it's highly unlikely that someone would use this lens for video without using a tripod, but I wanted to show what that would actually look like if it was something that was attempted. Here I chose to go with the most extreme example at 600 millimeters, and as you can see here, the stabilization is not built for handheld video at the max focal length at least. So what I'm doing here is currently using stabilization mode 1 here, and yes, you can clearly make out that this is a pileated woodpecker, but if you keep trying to, then motion sickness is something you'd find out you either have or don't have by watching something like this video footage. Keep in mind that I was holding my breath from time to time to try and be as still as I could be also. Now, one of the possible saving graces is if you own a Sony body that allows for the exporting of the gyro data from the sensor. If this is the case, you might be able to take that footage into something like GyroFlow or one of Sony's other paid softwares and try to stabilize that footage, but that's also an extra step in your workflow that you'll have to figure out if you want to do or not. Either way, if you are wanting to use this lens for handheld video, you'll just want to temper any expectations you might have and bring a tripod with you just in case, or try using it at something like 150 millimeters, which, yeah, that might be a little bit better than this, but still probably not as good. The last thing I wanted to talk about here is how convenient the minimum focusing distance of this lens can be. Now, the minimum focusing distance here is about 0.58 meters, which converts to about 1.9 feet. For reference, the comparable Sony 200 to 600 millimeter has a minimum focusing distance of 2.4 meters, which is about 7.88 feet. Now, of course, the practicality of holding a 4-pound lens with a camera body attached and getting a stable close-up shot so nothing is blurry is still something that is questionable, but I say this all to say that if this is the one lens you bring with you and you're worried about not being able to get something relatively close up, then it's just something that you might be able to do. This might end up being another reason to look into this lens, and it's definitely something that I do appreciate in some cases, since it does allow me to not have to switch lenses out with another from time to time. Okay, so now that I've said almost every single thing I've wanted to say, I think the question on some people's mind is, would I recommend this lens? So let me not answer that in the most straightforward way possible, because I don't like giving straight yeses sometimes. It's not that simple. But let me say this. To summarize this lens up, like I was trying to do before, this is a reasonably priced super telephoto lens that has limitations imposed on it by Sony. If those limitations, i.e. the limitation of 600 millimeters not being enough, like I mentioned before, isn't something that is truly a factor for you, then I would definitely go ahead and take a look at this lens. And of course, that limitation, the big limitation at least I'm referring to for me, is the fact that there is no teleconverter support because Sony does not allow it for third-party lenses at this moment. Overall, yeah, I would definitely say, you know, if you're someone who is, let's say for instance, I don't know, you're in a stadium and you're doing sports photography, I think this will be an okay lens to go with. I think it'll be something that you definitely want to take a look into. If you're someone who is doing a lot of bird photography like I am, just know that you will definitely be able to get a lot of great shots. There are just going to be those times where birds are going to be off in the distance, and that's the exact reason I made that whole stadium sort of comparison there. In a stadium, you're going to be sitting at a certain length, you know the players are going to be at a certain length, and they can go no farther than, you know, what's going to be in the middle of the stadium. A bird has no limit to how high or how low it's going to fly, so it's kind of one of those things where you're patiently waiting. But yeah, overall, I think that the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter is definitely a great lens. It's definitely a really, really great and viable choice compared to what Sony offers. Like I said, just make sure you are aware of those limits. Anyway, I do hope that you did get something from this sort of follow-up video that I'm doing here. But as always, thank you for watching and thank you for all of the support. And I hope that I have maybe answered some question that someone had on someone's mind. If not, go ahead and leave a comment with a question and everything like that, and I will do my best to get back to you or do my best to answer that question. And also, there is an affiliate link in the description. Of course, I always say, do not feel like you have to purchase from those affiliate links, but they do definitely help me out. I do want to keep this channel going and everything, trying to grow it. So yeah, with all that being said, thank you for watching. Have a great day and peace, I guess.